Thanks, guys. As usual, we've got Grace Sharkey here, and of course, as usual, she has a ton of great work coming out. You heard Andrew call her one of the busiest ladies on the FreightWaves staff earlier, and I 100% agree with that statement. Grace, you just put out some awesome content, including a story that literally dropped about 10 minutes ago. Good morning. Welcome to FreightWaves Now. Tell us, how have you been so busy with all of this great reporting?
Yeah. Good morning. Just there's a world of freight out there, literally, to choose from. So it's been it's June 2nd. We already have multiple unicorns popping up, and clearly this DHL story is really great. Robotics as a service. So it's been 1 week, and I was just talking to you about capacity as a service. So it's been a fun weekend for sure, not just for the holiday, but for the news as well.
Absolutely. And so we're talking about this big story with DHL. They just dropped the news that they're partnering with Locust Robotics, bringing some more warehouse automation to all of their warehousing services. Tell us a little bit about what your story entails, Grace.
Yeah, so Locust started working with DHL supply chain in 2016 and actually started this partnership in 17, and really just wanted to find ways to automate their warehouses and these robots. So as they actually sells robots as a service, were a perfect way for them to start dipping their toes in the robotics automation arena. Everything has gone great so far. They originally started with medical supplies and moved into more of retail, athleisure wear, into shoes. So as they began growing their robotics capacity with DHL. DHL has continued to extend that partnership, and this is just a larger extension of that. They're going to have up to 2,000 robots over the next couple of years, and what I really like about this business model, it's really a subscription model, right? Which I'm a huge fan of in general. It allows the consumer to test the waters and new innovation and technology that they might not be comfortable with, but it's easy to scale. And what's also great, personally, I think that subscription models really push the companies like Locust Robotics to continue to be innovative and continue to focus on the customer and their needs. So all of that's continued to work, and it's really great to see how they're selling these robots not just as an automation piece, but really as a employee engagement piece as well. So what's really great is DHL has had these robots in their warehouses for the last couple of years. Well, when COVID hit, a lot of the employees that were already working with these robots felt completely comfortable continuing their jobs with DHL because of the lack of close knit interaction with fellow employees. What's also great is they really allow DHL to push against the already employee gap that we see within supply chain. So these robots are able to talk in 21 different languages, which imagine the pool of employees that you can now pull from with that service. And they are connected to each employee. So as they approach different employees, they know how to interact with them. They know how they respond. They know what their work ethic is like. They've created like gamification systems to really empower the employee to continue to strive for excellence within the warehouse. So it's just an interesting way to look at robotics. I think a lot of times people hear robotics and think, okay, well, it's just robots are going to replace our jobs. No, 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 no. They're here to actually make your jobs a lot easier, and actually push you to reach certain goals. So I'm excited to see how the partnership continues to expand and how Locust continues to grow as robotics as a service model as well.
Hey Grace, this is Andrew here. I know you're right about kind of I don't know, the bad look that robotics get sometimes. I think if you ask an
Yeah.
Amazon worker that was walking 10 miles in a warehouse and now they only have to walk 1 mile and the robot does a lot of the actual picking for them, I think that they would actually enjoy the robots. I did want to ask, is this DHL's first kind of foray into robotics, the deal that they made back in 2017? Like, have they spread their bets out over a bunch of different robotics companies and they're kind of diving in with Locust now, or has this kind of been their only partner for the last few years?
I believe this has been their only partner for the last few years, and really, it sounds like what they're doing is expanding via warehouses, right? So they started with just a few warehouses and a special products, because the thing about picking is it takes time for these robots to learn the processes in the correct way to navigate these warehouses. So she actually touched on Karen touched on this in our interview that people really need to start implementing these robots as soon as possible, because they do work, but they do take time to learn the correct picking processes. And there's a different strategy behind picking like a snowboard compared to picking a pair of tennis shoes, right? There's different ways they go about it, different employees that they would use and interact with. So I think it's interesting how they've kind of started with different advanced cases and have expanded their robotics locations from there.
And so DHL has been using these robots not just for picking, but we also talked about in your interview with Karen about how they're using it to kind of speed and streamline that put away process too. During the pandemic, we saw a lot of buyers go to what's called bracketing, where they would buy a size up, a size down, and then their size between. And that incurs a ton of reverse logistics, either costs and pain points of having to put stuff away that comes back to your warehouse. Talk to us a little bit about how they're planning to use Locust when it comes to that put away process and kind of taking some of the stress and the strain of a process that really isn't very fun to put those returns away.
Yeah, it's funny when she was talking about that. I was kind of laughing because I am now that consumer. Like I am doing the same thing. I will buy the size above, size below, and then return whatever comes back. And it's interesting in the past, let's say that there's a one-off return. Well, this is 2/3 of the orders being returned. So when this comes back to the warehouse, it can't just sit in a pile or can't go into consignment or something like that. It's good product that can be used again and reshelved. So what's interesting is she was explaining to me that a lot of times this put away is usually pushed towards the end of the day, or more of like the night shift will take care of it. But what these robots can now do is plan that throughout the day. So it'll go up to an employee and it might say, hey, we need to go pick this. Or it will go up to them and say, hey, you're going to go pick this, but also while you're heading that way, go put this away as well. So it's very intuitive. And right there, you just cut time in half on both of those picks and putaways, right? Because the employee would more than likely go back and forth for each one. So I think that's what's really smart is these robots are picking up on these small areas that I think sometimes goes over our head or really just goes unseen by more executive management who might be able to do something about it, and also empowers the labor force during the day shift as well. So you don't have just one specific employee per shift. You have an employee that can really truly do it all.
Hey, Grace, there's so much competition right now for warehouse automation for these picking and packing systems. You got Berkshire Grey, there's Locust, Fabric, there's a bunch of very well-funded, prominent companies with huge and very smart teams behind them. This seems like a huge stamp of approval for Locust. Am I reading that correctly?
Yeah, 100%. And I think really what this stamp of approval goes to is that as a service model, right? Like it's about at least dipping your toes into this automation and giving it a try. Because I think that, like you said, with all the investment out there in robotics, like it's clearly working. It's not something that's so sci-fi that people can't wrap their heads around it. No, it's automating and it's improving the warehouse. But what's important is, okay, how do we make this a reasonable investment for different businesses, where there are some that have, I think, the capital to invest in robotics directly. There are others that small warehouses that maybe don't know if they can fully invest into it. This is going to allow them to test it and really scale. I think that's the biggest thing too, is like, okay, under this model, we're going to help you improve your warehouse, but we'll also be there with robots ready to go in a few weeks, not in a year or two, but as immediately as you need them in order to continue servicing your customers.
Which is awesome, of course, there. And you mentioned the word investment, so now we're going to take a little turn into your other two top stories of the day, both involving investments. Project 44 and Sender both raising a decent amount of capital. What's happening between those two?
Yeah, just a little bit of capital. Yeah. Yeah. I told you know what's funny? I was like, June 1st, hey, it's the month of the unicorns. Like, let's go.
Hmm.
So Project 44, I mean, FreightWaves has done myself, I guess, has done a really good job keeping up with what they're up to. The best thing that I really like about both of these stories, I think that they both grew to the point they are now in the same way, is they're very, very good at being strategic with their acquisitions, knowing what they're really strong at and knowing where they need to implement a team that they're not as strong at, right? So you have Project 44, who has clearly just completely attacked the visibility of the global market, is working on their truckload visibility in China, which I think is going to be huge payoff for them in the long run, and being able to take on larger, more enterprise customers and give them that visibility throughout their full supply chain. So just really props to them and Jet and the rest of his team for really, really noticing where they can add to their team to be more successful. And what's really great too is that, in all of the reviews of this for Project 44, Jet has been so focused on pointing at his team for that growth. So who doesn't love senior leadership and an executive who's going to point to the people underneath him and say, hey, we are where we are because of you. So props to them. And then Sender, I think, is a really interesting growth strategy because they've really been able to capitalize on the European markets. The biggest thing that I really like seeing is clearly they bought Uber Freight Europe, right? And they have a really interesting deal with Uber Freight here in the US, along with part ownership within Uber Freight, is that if someone gets a customer who also has a customer in the opposite region, right, that's their number one referral. So who wouldn't love that agreement? That's the perfect setup for me. And you know what? It allows both teams to focus on the areas that they're good at. I think especially when you're looking at creating like a digital freight forwarder, when you look at Europe compared to the United States, like you got just population densities are completely different. Carrier and road regulations are completely different. So both of these are very strategic in saying, hey, let's focus on our own market and go from there. So it's great to see Sender really taking this head on. And there was rumors that they were going to go SPAC. One of their investors had recently created a SPAC, he had invested in Spotify and things like that in the past. But it looks like now with the new funds that they're not going to have to go that route, which I don't hate. I think that's you're really betting on yourself in that model. So that's really cool to see them do that.
Yeah, Grace, I was going to ask if this kind of shelves any plans for a SPAC or an IPO in the future for Sender. But I also wanted to ask, we got about 20 seconds here before we go. You just said that they're going to focus on what they're good at. Does that mean you think they're going to go out and keep acquiring companies? They've been on a tear, both of them, recently.
Yeah, it sounds like they're like already thinking of a couple for this year. So I'll keep a really close eye on them, and hopefully when we're on here again, we'll have some more Sender news for you guys. But yes, they're definitely the point of this raise was to continue acquisitions. So it's going to be fun to see exactly where they maneuver within that.
She'll be keeping an eye on all those mergers and acquisitions. You can find all of her content up on FreightWaves.com.